Hey everyone, WyrmsEye here, and today I would like to share with you my team that I ran at the VGC Birmingham Regional Championship held at the NEC Centre in Birmingham, the UK Games Expo, on the 3rd and 4th of June. Hopefully this will be a small series charting the teams I've taken to major events over the next few months and years, with a view to give you ideas on what to try using and also to analyse and improve the squads going forward. In the lead up to the event, the last European regional of the season, but not the last European major event with the Madrid special event still to come, I wasn't chasing an invite, so my expectations going into the event were very modest and quite a lot lower than what I would usually set myself, though I still wanted to go in with the intent of doing well. As always, winning is the main priority, but I wanted to go there, hopefully top cut, but if not, come away with some championship points and have a decent position. Obviously, I also wanted to enjoy playing at the event, so the function of the team was less of a priority, and it was more about having a laugh. To go in there, enjoy some time with friends and have some good conversations. So therefore the team was designed to be a lot easier to pilot and less nuanced than a lot of the other teams that I have used over the course of the season. Those of you who saw me at the event will realise that in terms of having fun, it was a case of I lost a bet in the lead up going to the event, which meant that I was dressed up in a Superman outfit for the entirety of Saturday, which went down very well, but obviously drew a few eyebrows. But in terms of having fun, it sort of helped me relax and not take the event too seriously. So our team for this event was built between Mimikyu, Snorlax, Torkoal. The three of them make a very good Trick Room core, and they all work together really well. The idea being very orchestrated. Mimikyu's Trick Room was in order to allow Snorlax and Torkoal to operate in the most effective manner, and it was very hyper offensive in its setup, as you will see with some of the sets that we will be showing going forward. Obviously the Snorlax ran Belly Drum, the Mimikyu had Psych Up to copy the Belly Drum's effect, and the Torkoal was running a very aggressive strategy in using choice specs to get the maximum amount of damage out of it. In addition to this, we also saw Metagross, Hariyama and Tapu Lele form the remainder of the team. The Metagross offered a raw damage aspect and also helped to facilitate the Trick Room setup. The ability to use Explosion at the beginning of the turn in order to help try and preserve the Mimikyu's ability to set the Trick Room up. Also provided a slight deterrent in using Raw from the likes of Arcanine and such, but also the ability to explode meant that players had to be very cautious when dealing around the Metagross in case it did go and use Explosion. We also have Hariyama here, which offered support in the form of Fake Out, but also provided a good damage aspect, having the Guts ability, and the Flame Orb meant that if it survived the initial turn and was under Trick Room, it could deal out massive amounts of damage with the likes of Close Combat and Knockoff to also aid its damage output as well as its supportive potential. Rounding out the team, we see Tapu Lele. This was aimed to provide damage in most of the situations where the other five weren't as good. Normally aimed to be a lead option for me with this team, but in practice I found that I wasn't using it as much, and it came to fruition over the course of the weekend during the event that I only used it on a couple of occasions. So moving on, we're going to be starting off with the Mimikyu here. Obviously you can see that it is a brave nature with the Mental Herb, disguises the ability, with 252 EVs in HP, 252 in attack, 4 in defense, and a 0 IV in speed. Moveset of Shadow Claw, Play Rough, Trick Room and Psych Up. The mental herb was a very big bonus and an absolute necessity for this team, because it meant that taunt could not affect me on the first use, and it usually meant that I could get a safe trick room on turn 1 in pretty much every game. It doesn't stop every aspect of stopping trick room. Obviously, moves such as roar and the potential for Pokemon to use Encore in order to trap me into certain trick room setups and repeatedly use trick room were very big aspects that we had to deal with. Thankfully, the mental herb also cures Encores, which I found out to my great surprise during the event. But this Mimikyu is basically aimed to pair up with Snorlax after the initial turn, and with the use of Psych Up, it helps to apply some pressure from multiple sides of the field on my side. Once Snorlax gets a belly drum up to +6, Mimikyu can copy the stat changes, and that gives Mimikyu a great way of dealing damage output to a vast array of threats and potential covers for the team in general. The max HP and attack investment meant that it gave improved survivability across both defences, but it also provided offensive pressure without needing the Psych Up to operate. To give you an idea of some of the calculations that we're dealing with, Mimikyu at -1 using Play Rough onto a standard Garchomp, so 4 HP and 0 investment in defense, usually wields within a 50 to 61% chance of 50 to 61% damage to the Garchomp, which is enough for a 2-hit KO under normal circumstances. But the idea is, paired up with Torkoal, we would be able to secure a knockout with a double target thanks to Torkoal's Eruption, and a Play Rough meant that at least 90% of the time under Trick Room we could deal with Garchomp fairly easily. Our next Pokemon that we're going to cover is Snorlax, and as you can see, it's an adamant nature with the Gluttony ability and the Figgy Berry. 4 HP investment, 140 in attack, 164 in defense, 196 in special defense, and 4 EVs in speed. Moveset of Facade, Crunch, Belly Drum, and Recycle. This set is basically a carbon copy of Lee Provost, or Osiris as he's better known, Snorlax from his Tapu Lele and Drifblim team that he focused on his channel of Road to School of Hard Knocks, sorry. So it's basically a carbon copy, so the adamant nature, not something that you would expect with this sort of Snorlax on a dedicated Trick Room team, but it does have its reasons. Not being minimum speed meant it offered clarity in a mirror match against a Snorlax. And Facade was used over return to catch any errant burns that was being used, and I found on a number of occasions Arcanines and even the occasional Drifblim was automatically burning Snorlax, not expecting the Facade, which meant that the lack of initial damage was mitigated at +6, and Facade obviously boosts, doubles in power once Snorlax receives a status ability. Crunch was a reliable second attacking move against using high horsepower. Could have also gone for Rock Slide in that slot as a spread move, which could have done decent damage. But we also used Belly Drum and Recycle to give continued longevity. Obviously the Gluttony ability activates the berry at 50%, which after a Belly Drum it procs automatically. Our third Pokemon is Torkoal. Now this is a quiet nature with the Drought ability, so sunlight automatically enters the fray as soon as Torkoal hits the battlefield, with the choice specs as its item. Investment wise, we're talking 252 EVs in HP, 252 in special attack, and 4 in special defense, with a 0 IV in speed. Moveset of Eruption, Heatwave, Flamethrower, and Solar Beam. So Torkoal acted as a raw damage dealer under Trick Room without any additional setup. Unlike Snorlax, it doesn't need a turn to set up the belly drum in order to really provide the offensive pressure that Snorlax can give out. And the use of multiple fire attacks on this set is in order to provide multiple situations that could arise. Eruption under Trick Room was a go-to, offering a big spread type damage attack. Heat Wave is obviously a good option if Torkoal has already taken some chip damage and has more power than an Eruption would have. Flamethrower offers a single target attack, just in case I feared Wide Guard, and Solar Beam covers a lot of the water types in the format that could potentially pose a threat to this team in general. Pokemon such as the Tapu Fini and the Gastrodon are particularly big threats that we would have to worry about. But the Torkoal was very much a high risk and high reward Pokemon. Outside of Trick Room, it has no Protect, so it is very prone to being targeted outside of Trick Room. And once an opponent ascertains that the Torkoal is in fact Choice Specs, they can relentlessly target that slot to mitigate any damage that could be done by Eruption, or just straight knock it out with various special type attacks. Predominantly, Tapu Koko is a big threat for Torkoal outside of Trick Room, but there are a multitude of others that could have been big threats as well. One thing to note here, the Torkoal does have good bulk. It does survive a Garchomp's Earthquake with spread damage, and can also survive Garchomp as a single type attack Earthquake. It can't unfortunately survive the Tectonic Rage, but understandably that is one of the major one of the biggest Z moves that is in the format at the moment, and understandably Garchomp does invest a lot in attack to provide the raw damage that it can deal out. But one of the big things is, as I've mentioned before, Torkoal pairs with Mimikyu very well in Trick Room to deal with Garchomps at under the Trick Room. A full health Eruption from Torkoal deals roughly between 55 to 65% damage onto a Garchomp under the sun. And with the Mimikyu Play Rough, it can always pick up the knockout even with the Mimikyu at -1. Obviously you do have to worry about Play Rough connecting, but for the majority of the time Torkoal will be able to deal enough damage to give Mimikyu, get the Mimikyu to have the range to knock out the Garchomp. Our next Pokemon is Metagross. So it is an adamant nature with the clear body ability. Choice band as its item with 252 in HP, 252 in attack, and the remaining 4 EVs in special defense, with a moveset of Explosion, Meteor Mash, Zen Headbutt, and Hammer Arm. So Metagross's set is very hyper aggressive. The main purpose of Metagross is to use Explosion next to a Mimikyu, especially on a turn 1 situation, in order to aid in Trick Room going off as soon as possible, and to allow the main Trick Room threats in the back, such as the Snorlax and the Torkoal, to come in safely and get the maximum amount of turns of Trick Room in order to deal significant damage. As I said before, Raw on Mimikyu is a potential way of stopping Trick Room, as it does sit in a higher priority bracket than Trick Room. But Metagross would be able to stop Raw by KOing most of the common Raw users, specifically Arcanine, unless they're super bulky. So if you don't know, Raw has a priority of a negative priority, so Explosion would go before any potential Raws come out into play. And with the clear body ability, Metagross doesn't suffer any attack penalty from the Arcanine's Intimidate, which makes it a very good user of Explosion. In a previous iteration of this team, I was using Silvally in the slot that Metagross is now. However, I was having issues with Silvally not being able to pick up the knockout with Explosion once it is intimidated, which did pose a a big question mark. Whereas Metagross, even though it doesn't get the same type attack bonus, the explosion actually does more damage than the Sylvallies, which meant that up to around a 244 and 68 defense Arcanine explosion will always pick up the knockout no matter what. And as a riposte, with the investment of the hit points into this Metagross, Arcanine's Flare Blitz from a standard 252 Adamant without any additional power up item only gets a 12.5% chance to knock out the Metagross back with Flare Blitz. So Metagross itself can quite easily take an attack from a Arcanine potentially and be able to knock out with the chip damage. It's a big threat, but obviously Meteor Mash poses threats to the various Tapu Lele, Tapu Fini and Tapu Bulu specifically. Zen Headbutt, very useful under the Psychic Terrain to deal some decent damage to a variety of threats. Again, Arcanine, Nihilego also could potentially be someone to benefit from. But the Hammer Arm is also there in case I want to use Metagross in Trick Room myself. Obviously, the speed stat of Metagross sits roughly around 90, so it is very slow. So Hammer Arm, after one Hammer Arm, it's going to be underspeeding most Porygon 2. So in Trick Room, that is a big benefit to us. And obviously, repeated uses. There are quite a few Pokemon that don't enjoy taking fighting type attacks in general in the tier. There are a few decent resists, but Hammer Arm is a good go-to. Obviously, this Metagross, if it does not use the explosion, it does have a tendency to miss with all of its remaining moves at 90% accuracy. Next on the list we have Hariyama, so a brave nature with Guts and the Flame Orb. Obviously a good combination, Guts and Flame Orb means that after the first turn Hariyama's damage output effectively goes through the roof. With investment of 92 points in hit HP, 252 in attack, 164 in defense and a 0 IV in speed, obviously to benefit from the Trick Room. With a moveset of Fake Out, Close Combat, Knock Off and Heavy Slam. So Hariyama offered a good supportive team member, but it was easily dangerous if an opponent left it unchecked at the very beginning of battles. Once the Flame Orb activates, it becomes a huge menace to deal with. Even at -1 with Arcanine's Intimidate, Hariyama can still deal over 60% to an Arcanine with a close combat -1 with Flame Orb. As you know, Knockoff is a great utility option. It's also integral for dealing with any potential Alolan Marowak that I ran into, which could have been a major problem for this team. Obviously, we don't have a solid way of dealing with Marowak outside of Torkoal's Eruption, which at best is pretty shaky. So Knockoff did provide a good means of dealing with Marowaks should I need to. And the Heavy Slam on this set was over the more conventional Poison Jab, purely by preference that I had built up going into the event. This traded utility against the Tapu for a better matchup against the likes of opposing Mimikyu and lighter fairies. In hindsight, I think Heavy Slam wasn't the correct call. I think Poison Jab has a much wider utility. It was only because Heavy Slam is something that I've been used to using on Hariyama in other teams that I was comfortable bringing it to the regional. But going forward, I will be swapping that to Poison Jab. And finally, our last Pokemon on this team is the Tapu Lele. So a modest nature with the Psychic Surge ability, so obviously sets up the Psychic Terrain when it hits the field. And Tapu Lele is our Z-move user with the Psychium Z. Investment wise, 228 in HP and 60 in defense, 148 in special attack, 4 in special defense and 68 in speed. So a very slow, bulky Tapu Lele, much akin to what you might find on a Tapu Lele and Drifblim core team in order to take some decent attacks, but also be able to dish them out in equal measure. Moveset wise, we have Psychic, Moonblast, Thunderbolt, and Protect. As I said before, the Z move used with the team has a good raw damage output outside of the Z move. The 148 in special attack is quite substantial compared to some sets, but obviously this is boosted by the modest nature to take it up to a significant level. In hindsight though, this was the least used member of the team. Because it was moderately bulky, it was in hindsight too slow for the intended purpose that was put forward. Ideally, Tapu Lele could have either been a choice scarf set in order to offset the much slower speeds of the remainder of my team, or we could have just built the Tapu Lele to be a lot faster in general and not be so bulky. This to outspeed a lot of the Pokemon that sit within the 120 to 140 bracket, including the likes of, not to mention Smeargle, which pose a serious threat to the team in general. There are of course a couple of calculations that it could survive with the bulk that it had. Unfortunately I can't remember any off the top of my head, so going forward I will try and find out what they are for and put them in the description of the video. So notable lead combinations, there are 3 that really stick out. Mimikyu and Metagross was my general go-to lead for the majority of this event. As I've said before, the Metagross's general idea is to explode, and Mimikyu is to trick room first turn. It's good for any potential Tapu Lele leads that my opponent might bring out, or any Arcanines that potentially may have Raw. Less so with the taunt users. If a user wanted to taunt Mimikyu, the Mental Herb would obviously restore the taunts, would remove the taunt effect from the Mimikyu and allow me to get Trick Room up safely. Obviously it could be very high risk and high reward. If an opponent decided to double protect, I would be losing Metagross for free without doing any damage, at the expense of getting the Trick Room up, which could have been a potential gain, but there is, at the end of the day, getting a aggressive Trick Room partner in lieu of the Metagross straight away offered a lot of benefits for some situations over others. Another good league combination that I found to my benefit is Mimikyu and Hariyama. Obviously Fake Out support offers a good option to set up Trick Room because it stops any double targets into the Mimikyu, which could potentially knock it out. And then Hariyama becomes a potent threat in subsequent turns with a general speed advantage under the Trick Room with the Flame Orb Guts boost. So with teams that didn't have Tapu Lele, Hariyama was a very good Pokemon to lead with Mimikyu, and obviously the Fake Out offered the support that was necessary in order to stop a double target into the Mimikyu to negate Trick Room going up. It also provided a good way of stopping Arcanine that could potentially have roared if I needed to go for a Fake Out straight away into the Arcanine, if I didn't feel comfortable bringing the Metagross. So either Metagross or Hariyama were the go-to leads with Mimikyu, but a third lead that I used, I think, very sparingly in this tournament was Mimikyu and Snorlax. And the idea is to set up Trick Room straight away, but also to Belly Drum as soon as possible with the Snorlax, in order to put as much pressure going into subsequent turns as possible. This meant that the opponent had to focus on either dealing with the Snorlax straight away or dealing with the Mimikyu to stop it from getting Trick Room up, and 9 times out of 10 it isn't able to do both. So that lead was very sparing. There are only a few combinations where it would ever be particularly useful. But it did come up in one of my earlier battles, which I can't remember the exact scenario, but it did. It made a difference because getting the belly drum up straight away meant that I was able to pressure straight away under the trick room rather than taking a turn of setup. So the biggest threats for this team. The major one that I found to my biggest cost was a pairing of Tapu Lele and Smeagol. With these two on the same team, it's practically impossible for me to stop Smeagol from incapacitating Mimikyu with Spore. For example, if I wanted to go with Metagross's Explosion, the Smeagol could elect to Spore the Mimikyu, take the Explosion by protecting the ally for Smeagol, and Smeagol goes down to its Focus Sash. And that would put me in a bad position generally, because in the back I would usually carry 2 Trick Room threats to deal with, to get straight underway under Trick Room. In general, Smeagol usually was one of my worst matchups to encounter, and it's a practical auto loss if Tapu Lele also features with it on the team, because Hariyama therefore also doesn't become a very useful pick against this team as well, because the Psychic Terrain can block the fake out that I would want to use with Hariyama into Smeagol to stop it from incapacitating the Mimikyu. One of the other big threats that I found was Gigalith. Gigalith was very difficult to take down unless Hariyama was still available on the field if I brought it, or if Torkoal locked itself into Solar Beam. Hariyama with the Guts boost, close combat, can easily one-shot a Gigalith, but it does mean that Hariyama has to come. And if Gigalith is also paired with Tapu Lele in the same vein as before, it means that it's not easy for me to deal with the Gigalith with Tapu Lele in tow, because Hariyama cannot take any attacks from a Tapu Lele come what may. Weather Shuffling with the Gigalith also ruins the latter's ability for Torkoal to use Solar Beam. By Gigalith switching out and coming back in, the Sandstorm would be reset, and it would mean that Torkoal's Solar Beams would take additional turns to set up, and that would basically grind my Torkoal's ability to sweep to a halt. Snorlax can obviously check Gigalith if it's at +6 attack with the use of Crunch, but it is obviously very difficult for me to benefit from that, and Gigalith does have a very high defense, so even at +6 attack I think Crunch is still a 2-hit KO on a Gigalith as well. Not having Trick Room is as much a problem for this team as the other two. If the Trick Room is denied or expires whilst in the middle of a game, unless I'm in a commanding position on the field, the game becomes increasingly difficult to lock up. On a number of occasions I did manage to set up Trick Room successfully in an opening turn, but if I wasn't able to remove 2 or even 3 of my opponent's Pokemon in the time that the Trick Room is active, after the Trick Room drops, if Mimikyu is actually fainted, it makes it a lot more difficult for me to remain in contention, because very often my remaining 2 Pokemon would be a Snorlax, which admittedly bulky, can't take repeated hits even with Recycle to restore the berry, and Torkoal, as we've said before, does not have Protect and is very susceptible to being targeted on the special spectrum. If Mimikyu is still on the field, at the very least Trick Room can be threatened by wanting to try and set it up again. Very often a opponent will target into the Mimikyu to stop that if it is still active, and by so doing it gives my my ally Pokemon an opportunity to attack into one of the slots to potentially pick up a further knockout. Finally, the last big threat that this team has to deal with is Garchomp. Over the course of the weekend, I did come across a couple of players that played their Garchomps absolutely well, and one of those that comes to mind is Richard Fairbrother, who preserved his Garchomp in the latter games of our set to clinch the series 2-1. So a well-preserved Garchomp can easily win games. Mimikyu and Torkoal under Trick Room, as we've noted before, can double into it for a knockout. But if we don't have the opportunity to do this, invariably the late game becomes a lot harder to manage. So if they manage to keep their Garchomp in the back for long enough and gets outside of Trick Room, Garchomp usually can start doing massive amounts of damage to my team, and it becomes increasingly difficult for me to deal with. So, in terms of my record going from the event, I finished with a record of 4-3, and I finished 45th out of 128 players. So it was not an ideal situation for me to be in. I did play some very capable opponents, and as I said before, I ran into some of the matchups that I wasn't really prepared for. Obviously, as I said before, this team was a bit more loose than some that I would normally use, and that meant I sacrificed a lot of matchups that I didn't really consider, Smeargle being the biggest one. I encountered, I think, 3 Smeargles over the course of the 7 rounds, one of which I did actually defeat, but the other 2 I lost quite convincingly to, including a Smeargle Lele team that was piloted by Barry Anderson in round 6, I believe, where I absolutely could do nothing, and that's what I mean by an auto loss. I didn't have any way of actually stopping the setup that his team could provide him, and it just meant that I was swept aside pretty quickly. But outside of that, in terms of the team, if it was able to get the setup done quickly and effectively, it could win games in 10 minutes flat. But it, as I've said before, if it comes across a matchup it doesn't like, in some cases it can grind out wins, but very often it will lose quite convincingly as well, especially if my opponent has sufficient ways of dealing with the setup itself. In terms of updates that I want to bring to this team, I want to switch Tapu Lele in for Tapu Koko. The reason for this is it aims to provide a lead that can outspeed a lot of various threats at the outset, whereas Lele was very slow and very bulky. But it also provides a potential cover for Smeargle focused teams that I struggle with by utilising the electric terrain to negate the spore threat from the Smeargle. Obviously it's not a hard and fast stoppage, because if my opponent has a Tapu of their own, if they switch that in, the spore will then take effect, especially if Tapu Lele is with a Smeargle as well. So it's still a matchup that I have to play very carefully in, but with Tapu Koko providing the electric terrain, all of my mons are grounded, so not being able to put to sleep is at the very least a big bonus for me, even if it means that I lead, if I don't lead Tapu Koko and switch into in order to take to negate the spore from a potential Smeargle. Other aspects of that is it provides me good electric type coverage. Thunderbolt and Volt Switch obviously provide good damage output and an ability to switch. Volt Switch is less useful on this team because of the way that the team is built. It doesn't really want to take too much damage in the likes of Torkoal and Snorlax, and because Tapu Koko is quite fast, if it switches into one of them, it's going to have to take an attack if it is targeted. But it also, we could use items such as the WyrmsEye to deal with Garchomps as a lead option. Obviously the WyrmsEye would pick up the knockout onto most Garchomps setups. And in general, it provides a good way of attacking Kartana early. It provides a good way of dealing with the likes of intimidators such as Gyarados and Arcanine especially. It can deal some decent damage too under the electric terrain. So the other update is to a minor amendment in how Torkoal is trained. This investment changes to move the majority of the HP investment and switch the focus into the special defensive stat. This is in order to allow Torkoal to survive a Life Orb timid Tapu Koko's Thunderbolt even under the electric terrain. So I can't remember the exact figures, but I think once you move about 196 EVs from HP to special defense, you're able to survive this Koko Thunderbolt under the electric terrain, and similarly with a bit of defensive investment put in for good measure out of the HP investment, you're also able to still retain the ability to survive Garchomp Earthquake as a spread damage move and as a single target, I believe. But it also provides a high chance to survive Tapu Lele's Psychic in Psychic terrain. I think it's about a 70% chance to survive from a single hit. Finally, the last update that I will be making to the team is switching Heavy Slam to Poison Jab on Hariyama. Again, as I said before, Hariyama's use of Heavy Slam was a preference from a team that I was using before. But the more wider benefits of using Poison Jab mean the switch is merely to take a better advantage of the coverage options that is provided. We still manage to hit fairies for super effective damage. We get a better attack on the Tapu should we want to use it. The only downside that we would have is not being able to deal with Mimikyu as well as we would with Heavy Slam. Which is a fair trade-out, I think, because under most circumstances, if Mimikyu is on the field, a lot of the other Pokemon that we have on this team should be able to take a better advantage of dealing damage. So I thank you guys for watching. I hope you can like and comment about this team review if you have any feedback, anything that you would like to see added or you think could be improved upon, let me know. And if you do want to see more VGC content in the future, more of these videos and more of the Battle Spot Factory, subscribe to the channel for more content, as I hope to increase the variety of content that we're putting out on this channel. Obviously, as we're going forward, we are going to be doing the Battle Spot Factory, and as we approach VGC 2018, once we find out the new format, we'll also be doing more information upon that as well once we get to it. But obviously we're going to have to wait until Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon come out for that to happen. But until next time guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and goodbye for now.